That was odd. Joining me now to talk about that and a lot of things surrounding January 6th, one of my favorite people in the world, Julie Kelly. Julie, what am I looking at there? Because it looked to me like cops were chucking flashbangs and tear gas into a crowd of people. Is that what I'm looking at?
Yes, that is exactly what you are looking at and your viewers will be looking at. But most of the American public, thanks to the news media, has not seen that video. I think it's important to note that that video, when we posted it at American Greatness too, and it's corroborated by other video clips that we've received, that happened about 1:15 on January 6th. And you could tell those protesters were doing nothing wrong. They were singing, they were waving flags, they were not breaching any of the barriers. But yet DC Metro Police and US Capitol Police started throwing these flashbangs, some with rubber pellets. You can hear people saying that they got hit. They also were dousing the crowd with what one judge called super soakers of tear gas. So they were attacking this crowd, provoking them. And that's why you started to see some scuffles with police that day.
Okay, I guess the $1 million question, Julie, is why?
I think that the plan was to provoke these scenes that we saw afterwards, which is Trump supporters or protesters, not all of them were there just to support Donald Trump, but to provoke these people into clashing with police, which is what they did. And so I heard reports from people who were there, people who have sent me video showing what the police were doing. They said that they were attacking the crowd. Some of them were just randomly punching them. They were using batons on them. You know, Jesse, I always go back to the clip of Thomas Webster. He is a former Marine and ex-NYPD officer who's been charged with assaulting police. Now, this guy obviously is a police officer. You can see him running through the crowd and confronting police officers and saying, "You commie, you know what, take your stuff off. Why are you attacking Americans?" And so why would a New York Police Department officer, former Marine, confront one of his own, several of his own, and ask them why they were attacking Americans? And the answer is because that's exactly what they were doing.
Okay, Julie, what do we know about? I mean, there were all kinds of internet rumors flying all over the place about Antifa having possibly some bad actors in there, Black Lives Matter possibly having some bad actors in there. What do you know? Because you're always in the know on this stuff. What's real and what's fake?
You know, Jesse, I assume that some of those agitators were there. Will we ever really know the truth? No. But we do know now, with all of this video and testimony I've read in court, that there were police officers who intentionally provoked the crowd. Now, if you go back, Jesse, think about what was happening in June of 2020. We had a year-long investigation into whether Park Police and other officers used tear gas and other crowd control mechanisms against BLM and Antifa protesters who actually were threatening the White House. They were destroying property. They burned a historic church. They were vandalizing public streets. And so people were in uproar that the police used any sort of tear gas or chemical irritant to disperse that crowd. We found out later it had nothing to do with Trump's photo op at St. John Church across the street. But we've had no interest in what the police were doing that day. That's why we saw all the theatrics from the police officers last week. The tears, accusations, these people are terrorists and insurrectionists, and what they went through, because no one was there to ask them, well, what did you see your own colleagues do that day? Here's video, explain what we're looking at.
Julie, what are the conditions, the January 6th protesters who've been arrested, what are the conditions they're currently living in?
So, Jesse, the Justice Department has sought what is called pretrial detention for at least 100 protesters. Several of them have been charged with attacking or assaulting police officers. Some are nonviolent. 36, at least right now, have been housed in this DC, I call it DC deplorable jail, because it is part of the DC prison that is set aside only to house January 6th defendants. Now, I've talked to some of them while they've been incarcerated. I've talked to their lawyers. I talked to some, interviewed them after they were released. What happened was they have been, in many cases, set to 23 hours a day solitary confinement conditions. There's been reports of abuse by prison guards. Obviously, they have no access to religious services, no access to personal hygiene. They have to share a nail clipper. There's no shaving gear for any of them. And they, most importantly, have been denied routine access to their defense attorneys. I listened to a hearing last Friday. Timothy Hale, who's been in the jail since the first week of February, charged with no violent crime, and his lawyer for a solid week tried to reach him in the DC jail leading up to this hearing last Friday afternoon and could not access him. So we have all sorts of unconstitutional, un-American, really inhumane treatment of these defendants, while, as you know, Jesse, we've had how many attackers of police officers that we saw not just in 2020, but really every night in major cities, and they certainly are not hauled up to a special prison, kept like hardened criminals for months on end, awaiting trials that will not start until next year.
Well, look, that's all the bad news. The good news is I'm sure the FBI is all over the person who set the pipe bombs at the RNC and DNC. I mean, Julie, I'm sure you've been to DC a million times. I certainly have. I lived there for a year. It's got to be one of the most surveilled cities in the world. There are cameras everywhere. How many people has the FBI busted for setting down those pipe bombs?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know why we don't have those answers because, well, I'm assuming, Jesse, because the FBI is very busy banging down the doors of Indiana grandmothers and Florida pastors and veterans who live in Texas and Tennessee, stealing their devices and charging them with trespassing and disorderly conduct. So I think, give the FBI a break. They're super busy right now tracking down MAGA grandmas and charging them and trying to ruin their lives. We have no time for who might have set those pipe bombs that afternoon.
Well, no time at all.
No.
Hey, thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.